Hey guys, so I just thought I would share a more personal story. It's not one that I'm uncomfortable sharing by any means. Actually, part of my coping and healing process through it was to share my story, but it is a story that's very close to the heart, and that is my miscarriage story. So I've been pregnant twice, and my first pregnancy ended in miscarriage. So I found out I was pregnant on my 19th birthday. It was planned, and I used the fertility awareness method to track my cycle. And we got pregnant the first try, and I knew exactly when I ovulated, and I was super impatient and excited, and I did feel a little bit different within a couple of days after ovulating. And so probably 6 days past ovulation, I took a test, and if I remember correctly, it was 6 days, and that was my 19th birthday, like I mentioned, and it was the faintest positive ever, but it was positive. And it's a little fuzzy now. I think I took that midday, and I was like, it's kind of faint. I don't know for sure. I'll take one again. And I think I took one the next morning. Anyway, I took one that evening, right before my husband came home from work. And I tried to hold my pee as long as I could, so it was as concentrated as I could get it. And I took another one, and it was still positive. And so, after that first positive test, I had gone to the store and bought little onesies for the college that we both really like. And when he got home, I gave them to him, and he was shocked, and I'm sure as a lot of men feel, terrified. Anyway, so I was like, I'm pregnant, but it's still super early, so we don't know for sure that, things are gonna work out, and it could go either way at this point. And so I took a test, I think 2 or 3 days later, and it was still positive, and it was darker. And so I was so excited, and I was in the clouds. And then a few days after that, exactly 1 week after I found out I was pregnant, I woke up pretty early in the morning, probably about 3 or 4 in the morning, with with cramps. And I have really intense period cramps, and they felt like that. And I remember I was half asleep, and I immediately in my head went, oh no. And I'm pretty sure I started crying immediately. And I rushed to the bathroom, and I checked, and there was a lot of blood. And I didn't even question it. I knew I was miscarrying immediately. I knew it. And so I sat in the bathroom for probably an hour or so and just cried. And I was devastated. And then after about an hour, like I said, I went and woke up my husband and let him know that I had a miscarriage, or that I was miscarrying, and cried some more. And it was my first pregnancy, and before I even got pregnant, I had these fears that I was gonna, for some reason, deal with infertility or miscarriages or something along those lines. And when it happened, it was almost like, well, my fears are confirmed, I'm never gonna be a mom. Like, it was like the world was ending, and it was so overdramatic, but that's what my mind went to. And I was heartbroken, because I've always dreamed of being a mom. I was that little girl who didn't want to play with Barbie dolls. I wanted to play with babies. And every time I would see a baby, I would just be like, oh my goodness, I want to hold the baby so bad. I've always been baby obsessed. And it felt like all of my dreams were crashing to the ground. And so I messaged my mom. She lives in a different state than me. And I asked her, or I told her, hey, I'm pregnant, but I'm miscarrying. And I asked her what to do, what her advice would be. And she asked, how far along I was and how I was doing. And basically her advice was because of how early I was. I was only like 5 or 6 weeks along. But her advice was because of how early I was, more than likely my body would pass it naturally with no problem, but it might not be a bad idea to go to the hospital and double check, just to make sure everything's getting cleared out the way it needs to. And I kept going back and forth. I'm not a fan of hospitals. I don't like any experience I've ever had. And so I kept going back and forth about what I should do. And eventually I decided, I'm going to go to the hospital just to get checked and make sure everything's okay. And so I texted my mother-in-law and asked her if she was busy and if she could take me. And I went over there to her house, and I remember it had to have been about 7:30 or 8 o'clock when I showed up, because she was just sending off the youngest, not the youngest, but the younger kids to school. And so I went in and I waited with her for a bit, and then while I was waiting for the last kid to get on the bus, I kind of was like, I didn't want to deal with the hospital, and so I talked to her and I let her know that I was just going to go home. And I was going to try to get some rest, because I hadn't, I woke up at like 3 in the morning and I hadn't gone to sleep again. And so I went home and I just cried a lot that day. A lot. And I just kept going back and forth, and I remember, and this might be TMI, but it was part of my grieving process, and it's totally normal, a normal part of a grieving process. I remember every time I went to the bathroom, I would check all of the blood and see if I could find the baby. Even at that point, the baby would be tiny, kind of just a blob in a sack. It wouldn't really be all that noticeable. It would look probably mostly like just a blood clot. But I obsessively checked every single time. And again, TMI, but it was just part of how I coped and how I grieved. I kept the underwear I was wearing when I started bleeding and started miscarrying. I did eventually get rid of those, but for a long time after that, I had a picture of it. I'd taken the picture initially so I could show the doctor when I went to the hospital, just in case I wanted to know how much bleeding. But it ended up being just kind of symbolic for me, and deleting it was a big deal. I did eventually delete it, but it was a big deal. It took me over a year to be able to delete it. Anyway, so like I was saying, I would obsessively check for the baby. I just wanted to find my baby. I wanted to hold my baby for the one time that I would be able to. And I wanted that baby to know how loved that he or she was. And in my heart, I really, really felt like that baby was a boy. I just felt like I knew it was a boy. So I hung out around home that day, and then probably about 5 or 6, I decided, you know what, I'm going to, I am going to go to the hospital and just make sure that everything is clearing out the way it needs to. And so I texted my mother-in-law again, and, anyway, I texted my mother-in-law again to see if she would still be willing to go with me. And she was, and so we went. We got there around 7 o'clock or so, and I remember it was dark outside. And we went in, and they got us in really quickly, and they asked me about what was going on, and I let them know that I was pretty sure I was miscarrying. And I remember there was there was a nurse there who, for me to be admitted, they had to take my blood pressure really fast and take my temperature, I think. And she was so sweet. I let her know what was going on, and she was like, you know, this happens all the time, and bleeding doesn't always mean that it's a miscarriage. Your baby could still be okay. And she was just being really sweet and trying to reassure me. And I went back to the room and waited for a bit, and they took some blood, and they sent me back for the ultrasound, and they did a urine test. And I had one nurse who was there with me this entire time, and it wasn't the one that did my blood pressure and all of that, but there was one particular nurse who took care of me this entire time. And after I was done with the ultrasound, I came back into the room and waited for the results, and basically we were just waiting for the doctor to come in and tell us what the results were, and he or she never did. And so the I just forgot, it's the nurse, but it's not an RN. It's like a step above an RN. Anyway, she came in and she talked to me, and she goes, as soon as she walks in the door, she says, "So, you got a positive pregnancy test?" And I was like, "Yeah, I got 3. And she goes, "Oh, because you're not pregnant. Your uterus shows no signs of ever being pregnant." And that right there was like a slap in the face, because I knew I was pregnant. I was having signs of pregnancy already. I had 3 positive pregnancy tests, different kinds of pregnancy tests, and on different days. And all 3 were pregnant and getting darker. And I was having a miscarriage, and I knew it. I knew it. My cycle's extremely regular, and the way things happened that month, it was exactly like I was pregnant and having a miscarriage. And so that made me mad, and it made me feel like, I remember in my head thinking, my mother-in-law is going to think I'm crazy. She's going to think I'm a hypochondriac, and everyone's going to think I'm crazy. No one's going to believe me. And I was just devastated. It was like putting salt in the wound. I was already experiencing this huge loss, and all of a sudden I'm being told, "Oh, you're not experiencing loss, you're being dramatic." And she left, and at that point I was like, I just want to go home, and I want to go in bed. I just want to go to bed and not deal with this anymore. And then the nurse who had been dealing with me and taking care of me this entire time walks in right after, and she goes, "So did she tell you?" And I was like, "Yep, she did." And she's like, "Good news, right?" And that was like another slap in the face. I just couldn't believe it. I was appalled. It was like she was saying, "Good news, you were never even pregnant, so you didn't experience a loss." But first off, why would you assume that that's good news that I wasn't pregnant? And second off, why? And if I was pregnant and experiencing miscarriage, I wanted that baby. Even if that baby hadn't been planned, I wanted that baby. I had prayed for that baby. And for you to tell me it's good news, it was just incredibly invalidating, and I was devastated. And I was so ready to go home. And so we did go home. They discharged me. And I went home, and I just laid in bed and cried some more. And it took me a few days to validate myself and to say, no, you were pregnant. You experienced loss, and it's okay to grieve it. It took me a while, because I had these medical professionals saying, "No, you were never pregnant. Ever." When I knew I was. And so I grieved. And I was ready to try again immediately. I wanted a baby, and I knew it wouldn't replace that baby, but I wanted a baby in my arms to hold. But my husband wasn't ready, and I do remember my cycle returned just like a normal cycle after that. It was almost like nothing had happened. And my husband wasn't quite ready yet. And so we waited a couple of months, and then about 3 months later, we were ready again, and we got pregnant in January with Beau. And it was terrifying, but it was so exciting. I was so scared it was going to happen again. So when we passed 6 weeks, oh my goodness, I was ready to do a happy dance. And then when we passed 10 weeks, and then 12 weeks, and then the entire second trimester, and that's actually one thing I really liked about my midwives, is I went to my first appointment, and they had asked if I had any previous pregnancies, and I explained what had happened, and that basically I was like, well, I'm pretty sure I was pregnant, but when I went in, I'm pretty sure I was pregnant and had a miscarriage, but when I went in, they told me I was never pregnant. And my midwife looked at me like, oh my goodness, just because they don't see anything in your ultrasound scan doesn't mean you weren't pregnant. It just means you've already passed the baby. And it was just incredibly validating to know, you know, there is a medical professional who's telling me that I'm not crazy, that I knew my body and I knew I was pregnant. And I'm not crazy. But yeah, that is my miscarriage story. It's still devastating, and I still hold that baby very close to me in my heart. And the baby does not have a name, because we didn't know for sure that it was a boy or a girl, but I'm pretty sure it was a boy. I never did find his tissue as it passed. There was one point where, looking back, it may have been, and I really thought it was in the moment, and then I was like, no, I told myself, I convinced myself it was just a blood clot, but I think it might have been him. I don't know for sure. But yeah, we had no issues getting pregnant with Beau. Both pregnancies, we got pregnant the first try. And within a couple of days, both pregnancies, I knew I was pregnant. We're very lucky in that since we're both incredibly fertile and come from very fertile families. And I feel very grateful for that. But it was heartbreaking to go through a miscarriage, especially my first pregnancy. I mean, it's heartbreaking no matter when it is. But my first pregnancy, I didn't know what the future would hold. And I was so scared that I wouldn't ever be able to be pregnant again. But just know that if you have experienced miscarriage, or you are, and you're frantically Googling what to expect from a miscarriage, or what a miscarriage looks like, or all of these different aspects, know that you're not weird. You're normal. It is normal to feel those things. It's normal to grieve a pregnancy, whether you just found out an hour ago, or you're losing your baby at 40 weeks. It's normal to grieve, and it's okay to grieve. And even if you just thought you were pregnant and found out you aren't actually pregnant, it's okay to grieve, because something happens when you find out you're pregnant. Your brain just automatically starts preparing, and your heart immediately grows, and it's devastating when you find out you don't get to hold that baby, and you don't get to raise that baby. And so just know you aren't alone. 1 in 4 women experiences miscarriage or pregnancy loss at some point in their lives, and I am part of that 25, and if you are too, you aren't alone, and it's okay to grieve, and you need to let yourself grieve. And if you feel ready to get pregnant immediately again, that's fine, that's normal. And if you feel like you're not ready for a very long time, that's also normal. There is no one-size-fits-all when it comes to grieving and when it comes to loss. And I'm sorry that you've experienced loss, and my heart goes out to you.